There is something sitting in most kitchens right now that researchers have been studying for its effect on blood pressure for over 40 years. It is not a supplement. It is not a prescription. It is not something you order online. It is a spice, a real, specific, named spice that you can find on the shelf at any grocery store for under $5, and the clinical evidence behind what it does to the cardiovascular system is more substantial than most people realize. And the timing matters. When seniors add a small amount of this to a glass of warm water and drink it before bed, the effect on overnight blood pressure regulation, arterial stiffness, and the body's natural sodium clearing processes is measurably different from taking it at other times of day. I am going to explain exactly what this ingredient is, what the research actually shows, how much is effective, who should be careful, and what happens inside the body when this is done consistently over weeks and months. And I am going to tell you why nighttime, specifically the 30 to 60 minutes before sleep, is the window that makes this work better than it does at any other point in the 24-hour cycle. Before we begin, I want to say something clearly, because it matters more than anything else in this video. If you are currently taking prescription blood pressure medication, nothing in this video is a reason to stop or reduce it without speaking to your doctor. What we are discussing here is not a replacement for medication. It is something the research suggests may work alongside healthy habits, appropriate hydration, and medical care to support the body's own blood pressure regulating systems. The most dangerous thing a senior can do is quietly substitute a natural approach for a prescribed one without telling anyone. So everything that follows is about adding, understanding, and informing, not replacing. The ingredient is hibiscus, dried hibiscus flowers, also called Hibiscus sabdariffa, the deep crimson calices of a specific variety of hibiscus plant that have been used in traditional medicine across West Africa, Latin America, and parts of Southeast Asia for centuries. In those traditions, it was brewed as a tea, called agua de Jamaica in Mexico, bisap in Senegal, karkadeh in Egypt and Sudan. People drank it not because they understood the mechanism, but because generations of observation had told them it did something useful for the body. What modern research has done is begin to explain why. The most studied compound in hibiscus is a group of plant pigments called anthocyanins, the same class of antioxidants that give blueberries, red cabbage, and purple grapes their color. In hibiscus, the primary anthocyanins are delphinidin 3-sambubioside and cyanidin 3-sambubioside, and they are present in concentrations significantly higher than in most other commonly consumed plant foods. These compounds interact with several systems in the body that are directly involved in blood pressure regulation. They appear to inhibit ACE, angiotensin-converting enzyme, the same enzyme that prescription medications like lisinopril target. They appear to act as natural calcium channel antagonists in vascular smooth muscle, a mechanism similar in principle to drugs like amlodipine. And they appear to have diuretic properties that help the body clear excess sodium through urine, reducing the fluid volume that contributes to elevated blood pressure. Now, when I describe mechanisms that overlap with prescription medications, I want to be precise about something important. The degree to which hibiscus exerts these effects is meaningfully smaller than the degree to which pharmaceutical ACE inhibitors and calcium channel blockers exert them. Nobody should interpret this as hibiscus being a substitute for those drugs. But for a senior whose blood pressure is in the pre-hypertensive range, the 120 to 139 systolic zone where lifestyle changes can make a decisive difference, or for someone using hibiscus as a genuine complement to their prescribed treatment, the research suggests the effect is clinically real and not trivial. Let me walk through that research specifically, because vague claims about natural remedies helping blood pressure are everywhere, and most of them are not backed by anything rigorous. Hibiscus is different. It has been studied in randomized controlled trials, the same standard of evidence used to evaluate medications. One of the most cited studies, published in the Journal of Nutrition in 2010, enrolled adults with pre-hypertension or mild hypertension and assigned them to drink hibiscus tea made from a standardized preparation of dried hibiscus calices, The product used in that study was a commercially prepared dried hibiscus extract, daily for 6 weeks. The group drinking hibiscus showed a statistically significant reduction in systolic blood pressure compared to the placebo group. The average reduction was approximately 7 millimeters of mercury in systolic pressure. That number, 7 millimeters, may not sound dramatic, but in clinical terms, it is meaningful. Epidemiological research consistently shows that a 5 to 6 millimeter reduction in systolic blood pressure in a population reduces stroke risk by approximately 14% and heart attack risk by approximately 9%. A 7 millimeter reduction is not a rounding error. It is a number that has cardiovascular significance. A systematic review published in the Journal of Hypertension in 2015, which analyzed multiple controlled trials involving hibiscus, concluded that hibiscus consumption was associated with statistically significant reductions in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure, with a pooled reduction of approximately 7 millimeters of mercury systolic and approximately 3 millimeters diastolic. The review noted that the effect appeared most pronounced in individuals with elevated baseline blood pressure and was less significant in those who were already normotensive, which makes physiological sense. A body that is already regulating pressure well is less responsive to an additional modulator than a body where regulation is struggling. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Advanced Research compared hibiscus extract specifically in older adults, the population most relevant to this discussion, and found that consistent daily consumption over 8 weeks produced reductions in both blood pressure and markers of oxidative stress in vascular tissue. Oxidative stress in blood vessel walls is one of the mechanisms that drives arterial stiffening in aging, and reduced oxidative stress over time means vessels that remain more elastic and responsive, the opposite of what happens in untreated hypertension over years. Now let us talk about why the timing, before bed, matters more than most discussions about hibiscus acknowledge. Blood pressure follows a circadian rhythm. In a healthy individual, blood pressure naturally dips during sleep, a phenomenon called nocturnal dipping, typically falling 10 to 20% below daytime levels. This overnight dip is not cosmetic. It is when the cardiovascular system gets its deepest rest. The heart beats more slowly. The blood vessels have reduced tone. Repair and anti-inflammatory processes in the vascular endothelium, the inner lining of blood vessels, are most active during sleep. When this nocturnal dip does not occur, when a person's blood pressure remains elevated through the night, the outcome is significantly worse cardiovascular health over time. Non-dippers, as they are called in clinical research, have substantially higher rates of cardiovascular events, target organ damage, and kidney disease compared to those who dip appropriately. In older adults, the nocturnal dip is frequently blunted or absent. This happens for several reasons: aging baroreceptor reflexes, autonomic nervous system changes, sleep apnea, medications that wear off overnight, and sodium dysregulation as kidney function gradually declines. The result is that many seniors are spending 8 hours a night with blood pressure that is higher than it should be, and they have no idea because nobody checks blood pressure at 2 in the morning. This is where the timing of hibiscus becomes specifically relevant. The anthocyanins in hibiscus reach peak concentration in the bloodstream approximately 90 minutes to 2 hours after consumption. If you drink hibiscus tea 30 to 60 minutes before bed, those compounds are at or approaching peak levels during the early stages of sleep, precisely the window when the body should be initiating its natural pressure dip. The mild ACE, inhibiting and vasodilating effects of the hibiscus compounds, arriving exactly when the body's own circadian systems are attempting to reduce vascular tone, appear to support rather than fight that natural process. They do not force a drop. They facilitate the drop the body is already trying to make. In seniors whose nocturnal dipping mechanism has become sluggish, that facilitation may make a measurable difference to the blood pressure values recorded during morning monitoring. There is also a renal dimension to the nighttime timing. The kidneys are involved in blood pressure regulation partly through their management of sodium and fluid volume. One of the primary reasons blood pressure rises with age is that aging kidneys become less efficient at clearing sodium overnight, a pattern called sodium retention that is particularly pronounced during recumbency, when fluid from the legs redistributes into the central circulation. Hibiscus has demonstrated mild diuretic effects in research settings, supporting sodium excretion through a mechanism distinct from pharmaceutical diuretics. When this mild natriuretic effect peaks during the nighttime hours, it works alongside the kidney's own overnight fluid processing phase to reduce the sodium and volume load that would otherwise push morning blood pressure higher. Before I explain the preparation and dosing, I want to stay with the nighttime biology a moment longer because it changes how seniors should think about managing blood pressure generally, not just with hibiscus. Most people have their blood pressure checked once at a clinic visit, usually in the middle of the day. That single number is then used to make treatment decisions that apply to every hour of that person's day and night. The problem is that blood pressure is not a stable value. It oscillates across a 24-hour arc that is driven by the circadian clock, hormonal cycles, posture, activity, digestion, emotional state, and sleep stage. In a healthy young adult, the variation between the lowest overnight reading and the highest daytime reading can be 20 to 30 millimeters of mercury. In seniors with arterial stiffness and blunted autonomic reflexes, that variation may actually become smaller, but for different and concerning reasons than in a healthy person. The morning surge is one of the most physiologically significant blood pressure events of the day. In the hour or two after waking, cortisol rises sharply, sympathetic nervous system activity increases, heart rate climbs, and blood pressure often reaches its highest point of the day. This is the window in which heart attacks and strokes are statistically most common. The morning surge is partly driven by the termination of the overnight rest period, by the body reactivating its alert systems, and partly by the physiological state that built up during the night. If nocturnal blood pressure was inadequately controlled during sleep, the morning surge starts from a higher floor, creating a steeper and more dangerous spike. This is why the question of what happens to blood pressure during sleep is not academic. It is the difference between waking up from a protected overnight rest and waking up from 8 hours of unrelieved cardiovascular stress. And it is why an intervention timed to the transition into sleep, taken 30 to 60 minutes before bed, peaking in the bloodstream during early sleep, is not just a convenient time slot. It is a strategic window that directly targets the overnight period that has the most clinical significance. Ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, a portable blood pressure device worn for 24 hours that takes readings every 20 to 30 minutes through the day and night, is the gold standard for understanding a person's true blood pressure profile. Most seniors have never had one. Most seniors have had only office readings, which capture perhaps 6 to 10 data points per year out of the tens of thousands of readings their body is producing. If you have stage 1 hypertension that is being watched and managed through lifestyle, asking your doctor whether ambulatory monitoring is appropriate for you is one of the most useful questions you can raise. The results often reveal patterns: nocturnal non-dipping, morning surge magnitude, afternoon lows, that change treatment decisions in ways a single office reading never could. Let me tell you about Edna, 72, who had been monitoring her blood pressure at home for about 2 years after her doctor told her she was consistently in the stage 1 hypertension range. Systolic readings between 135 and 148, which her doctor wanted to watch before considering medication. Edna was walking daily, reducing her sodium intake, sleeping well. Her numbers improved but plateaued. She read about hibiscus and was skeptical. She said it sounded like the kind of thing her neighbors swore by, along with 17 other things, and therefore she trusted none of it. But she had a physician daughter who looked at the research and told her the evidence was real enough to try. Edna started making a cup of hibiscus tea. She used a preparation of dried hibiscus calices, the kind sold at most Latin grocery stores, in a bag labeled Flor de Jamaica, steeped in 8 ounces of hot water for 10 minutes and cooled slightly, every night 30 minutes before bed. She did not change anything else in her routine. After 6 weeks, her morning blood pressure readings, which had been averaging 139/87, were averaging 129/81. Her doctor reviewed the 2 months of home monitoring logs at her next appointment and said the numbers were the best she had seen in the 2 years she had been following Edna. Nothing else in Edna's life had changed during those 6 weeks. She continued. At the 12-week mark, her systolic average was 126. Edna is not a clinical trial. Her experience is not proof, but it is consistent with what the research predicts would happen in a prehypertensive senior who added hibiscus consistently at the right time, and it illustrates what meaningful monitoring looks like in this context. Now, let me be specific about how to use this, because preparation matters and the details are not trivial. Dried hibiscus calices, the whole flower petals of Hibiscus sabdariffa, are what you want. They are the deep burgundy crimson dried flowers sold in Latin grocery stores as Flor de Jamaica and in health food stores and on Amazon as hibiscus tea or hibiscus flowers. Brands that have been consistently sourced and tested for purity include Frontier Co-op Organic Hibiscus Flowers, which is available at Whole Foods and online for approximately $8 to $10 for a 16-ounce bag. Star West Botanicals Organic Hibiscus Flowers is another well-regarded option, available online for similar pricing. The Bigelow benefits. Calm Stomach Tea contains hibiscus as a primary ingredient and is available at most major grocery chains for under $6 per box, though the concentration of hibiscus per cup is somewhat lower than a loose-leaf preparation. For maximum potency, whole-dried calices brewed as a steep are superior to commercial tea bags with hibiscus as a secondary ingredient. To prepare, bring 8 ounces of water to a near boil, steep 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried hibiscus calices for 10 to 15 minutes, strain, and let cool to a comfortable drinking temperature. The resulting tea will be deep ruby red and tart, similar to a cranberry flavor. It can be consumed unsweetened, which is ideal, or with a very small amount of raw honey. Do not add sugar. The glycemic impact of added sugar creates a blood glucose spike that stimulates insulin, which stimulates sympathetic nervous system activity, which can raise blood pressure and directly work against what you are trying to achieve. If the tartness is difficult initially, diluting with an additional 4 ounces of water slightly reduces the intensity without significantly reducing the therapeutic compounds. The effective dose in clinical research has generally been in the range of 1.5 to 2 grams of dried hibiscus per serving, which corresponds roughly to 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried calices. More is not necessarily better. The studies showing meaningful blood pressure reduction used preparation methods consistent with traditional tea brewing, not concentrated extracts or high-dose capsules. There is no established benefit to consuming larger amounts, and as I will discuss shortly, there are reasons for some individuals to be cautious about dosing. I also want to be clear about what hibiscus does not do, because misrepresentation of natural remedies does real harm to the people who need accurate information. Hibiscus does not cure hypertension. It does not dissolve arterial plaques. It does not reverse years of vascular damage. It does not replace the need for weight management, sodium reduction, physical activity, adequate sleep, or appropriate medication when medication is warranted. The studies showing blood pressure reduction consistently show reductions in people who are doing the basics well. And in that context, hibiscus appears to add a measurable incremental benefit. In a person who is consuming a high-sodium diet, sedentary, chronically sleep-deprived, and overweight, a nightly cup of hibiscus tea is not going to move the needle meaningfully. The body's blood pressure regulation is governed by a complex web of factors, and hibiscus can modulate 1 or 2 threads of that web. But a single thread being tugged does not restructure the entire fabric if the other threads are pulling in the wrong direction. The mechanism beyond the anthocyanins is worth understanding because it touches something that affects nearly every senior taking blood pressure medication or trying to manage blood pressure naturally, and that is the role of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a molecule produced inside blood vessel walls that tells those vessels to relax and dilate. It is one of the most fundamental regulators of vascular tone in the body. As people age, nitric oxide production declines. The endothelial cells lining blood vessels produce less of it because the enzyme responsible for making it, endothelial nitric oxide synthase, becomes less active under conditions of oxidative stress and chronic low-grade inflammation. This reduced nitric oxide availability is one of the primary reasons blood vessels stiffen and blood pressure rises with age. It is also one of the reasons exercise helps. Physical activity stimulates nitric oxide release and helps maintain endothelial function. Hibiscus anthocyanins appear to stimulate nitric oxide production in endothelial cells directly. They interact with the nitric oxide synthase enzyme in a way that encourages greater nitric oxide output. This effect is distinct from and additive to the ACE-inhibiting and calcium channel effects described earlier. What that means practically is that regular hibiscus consumption does not just act like a mild blood pressure drug. It appears to support the underlying mechanism that produces healthy vascular tone, rather than simply working around its failure. That distinction matters for seniors, because a compound that helps the body's own regulatory system function better is doing something qualitatively different from a compound that simply overrides what the body is doing. Let me tell you about Donald, 67, who came to a wellness consultation with blood pressure that had been creeping upward over 5 years, from 125/80 at 62 to 144/90 at 67. His doctor had recommended lifestyle changes, and Donald had made genuine efforts. He walked 4 days a week. He had reduced processed food. He was sleeping adequately. His numbers had improved somewhat, but were still in the range where medication would soon be the discussion. He was not opposed to medication if it became necessary, but he wanted to exhaust the lifestyle options first. He added hibiscus tea at night, prepared from Frontier Co-op dried hibiscus calices, 2 teaspoons steeped for 12 minutes, every evening for 8 weeks. He also started paying specific attention to his potassium intake, adding a banana and a portion of spinach to his daily diet, because potassium is the dietary mineral with the most consistent blood pressure lowering evidence, and many seniors are mildly deficient. At 8 weeks, Donald's average morning systolic had dropped from 144 to 133. His diastolic had come from 90 to 84. His physician noted the improvement and agreed to continue monitoring without starting medication with a 3-month reassessment. Donald was not under any illusions that he had cured himself, but he had moved out of the zone where medication was an immediate conversation, and he had done it with changes that also improved his diet quality and antioxidant intake broadly, benefits that extend well beyond blood pressure. There is a broader dietary context that I want to address here, because it is directly connected to why hibiscus works better in some seniors than others, and it comes down to the potassium-sodium balance in the diet. The kidneys regulate blood pressure partly by managing how much sodium and potassium are retained versus excreted. These two minerals work in physiological opposition. Sodium promotes fluid retention and raises blood pressure, while potassium promotes sodium excretion and helps relax blood vessel walls. The ratio between dietary potassium and sodium matters as much as, and possibly more than, either mineral alone. Traditional dietary patterns in cultures where hibiscus consumption has been embedded for centuries, West African, Mesoamerican, North African, also tended to be high in plant-derived potassium from beans, root vegetables, and leafy greens, and relatively lower in processed sodium than modern diets. The combination of hibiscus and a favorable potassium to sodium ratio may be why those traditional practices showed such consistent benefit in the populations that use them. For modern seniors eating a typical Western diet, where sodium intake often runs 2 to 3 times above recommended levels and potassium intake is frequently below adequate, the potassium deficit is as important a target as anything hibiscus can offer. Potassium-rich foods that are practical and accessible include baked white potatoes with the skin, which contain more potassium per serving than a banana. A medium baked potato provides roughly 900 milligrams of potassium. Cooked spinach, Swiss chard, white beans, lentils, and edamame are all substantial potassium sources that can be incorporated into meals at low cost. The recommended adequate intake of potassium for older adults is approximately 4,700 milligrams per day. Most seniors are consuming closer to 2,500 to 3,000. Closing that gap through food, not through potassium supplements, which can be harmful for people on ACE inhibitors or with kidney disease without physician guidance, creates the dietary foundation that makes hibiscus and other natural interventions far more effective than they would be in a body already struggling with electrolyte imbalance. The connection between sleep architecture and blood pressure in seniors is the other piece of context that belongs in this conversation. Deep sleep, specifically the slow-wave sleep stages that dominate the first half of the night, is when the parasympathetic nervous system is most active and blood pressure is at its lowest. Growth hormone is released. Inflammatory markers drop. The cardiovascular system rests more deeply than at any other time. As people age, the proportion of slow-wave sleep they achieve each night declines. Many seniors spend more time in lighter sleep stages and less time in the restorative deep stages that were more abundant in their younger years. The result is shorter periods of true cardiovascular rest during the night. Hibiscus consumed before bed does not directly increase slow-wave sleep, but it reduces the physiological arousal state through its mild vasodilatory and autonomic modulating effects that can impede the transition into deep sleep in people with cardiovascular tension. Some seniors report that consistent evening hibiscus consumption improves their subjective sleep quality alongside their blood pressure readings. The mechanism is not fully characterized, but it is consistent with the known physiology. A body with lower vascular tone and reduced sympathetic activation at sleep onset has less physiological friction to work against when attempting to enter deep sleep. That cascade, lower tension, easier deep sleep, better nocturnal dipping, lower morning surge, is the chain that links a simple nightly beverage to outcomes that extend meaningfully through the entire cardiovascular day. Now there are specific cautions that seniors must understand before making hibiscus a nightly habit, because the same properties that make it therapeutically useful can create problems in certain situations. The first is blood pressure that is already well controlled. If you are on lisinopril, amlodipine, metoprolol, or any other antihypertensive medication, and your blood pressure is running in a normal range, adding hibiscus may push it lower than is optimal. Symptoms of blood pressure that is too low, dizziness, lightheadedness, a momentary blacking of vision when standing, weakness, fatigue, are the signals to watch for. They typically appear in the morning after rising, because overnight the blood pressure lowering effects of both the medication and the hibiscus have been working together. If you add hibiscus and begin noticing any of these symptoms, stop the hibiscus and speak to your doctor before resuming. This is not an emergency in most cases, it is information. But in a senior with impaired balance or fall risk, blood pressure that drops too far on standing is genuinely dangerous. The second caution involves blood thinners. Hibiscus has mild antiplatelet properties. It modestly reduces the tendency of platelets to clump together, which is part of how it may help vascular health. But for seniors taking warfarin, sold as Coumadin, or newer anticoagulants like rivaroxaban, sold as Xarelto, or apixaban, sold as Eliquis, or dabigatran, sold as Pradaxa, adding a compound with antiplatelet effects without informing your prescribing physician is not a safe choice. The interactions are not well characterized, the risk may be modest, but for patients on anticoagulation therapy, modest and uncharacterized is not good enough. Tell your doctor before adding hibiscus to your routine if you take any blood-thinning medication. The third caution is for patients with low blood pressure at baseline, chronic hypotension, or conditions like adrenal insufficiency or autonomic dysfunction that already result in low or labile blood pressure. For these individuals, a vasodilating compound taken overnight could produce hypotensive episodes that range from uncomfortable to dangerous. The fourth caution is for patients with known kidney disease who are already managing their fluid and electrolyte balance carefully. The mild diuretic effect of hibiscus is benign for most people. In someone already taking a diuretic for heart failure and managing their fluid output precisely, adding an additional mild diuretic agent at night could create imbalance. Not dramatically, but enough to be worth a conversation.